This video is sponsored by SquareSpace. Stick around to find out more about building your own website. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's JPR, and welcome to the Trainer School. It's time to whip out your textbooks and take some notes because today we're going over every change made to every type in every generation. That way you can't get bamboozled when you go back to play the older games. Assuming that that's a thing that people actually do on a regular basis, and it's not just me being an overly obsessed nerd. Well, either way, you'll learn more than an average class on Zoom, so let's get started. In Gen 1, the type chart looks very similar to how it does today, except for a couple of small changes. That being that Bug and Poison are super effective against each other. For a long time, I thought it was only Poison that was super effective against Bug because, well, that makes sense. Pesticides are indeed a thing, but I frequently forget that in Gen 1, Bug also deals super effective damage against Poison. Not that it matters too much, seeing as how there are only two viable damage-dealing Bug moves in Gen 1, and both of these moves are only learned by Beedrill, so it's not like this is a super common thing to come across. But this does mean that every Pokemon in the Celadon Gym in Gen 1 has a double weakness to Bug aside from Erica's Tangela, so that's a decent tip to store in your noggin. On the flip side, it means that Paris and Parasect for a brief time were double weak to 3 types: Fire, Flying, and Poison, arguably making them the worst Pokemon in the game. In Gen 2, Poison types are now resistant to Bug moves, but they hit Bugs for neutral damage now as well. So both types are nerfed offensively, but Poison came out a half step on top. Not that it really matters at all, because to this day, these types are still both pretty bad. Gen 2 also introduced Dark and Steel types as a direct nerf to the infamously overpowered Gen 1 Psychic type. With this, Magnemite and Magneton became the first Pokemon to have their types changed from pure Electric to Electric Steel. The Ghost type was also fixed in this generation to finally hit Psychic types for super effective damage. They couldn't hit Psychic types at all in Gen 1 due to a coding error. So that guy who encouraged Ash to go catch a Ghost type in Lavender Town was basically feeding lies to his face. Ghost types are now immune to the move Glare in this gen, as well as in Gen 3, but that was curiously taken back in Gen 4. One effect was undone for normal and ghost types in this generation though, and that was that moves with a secondary effect won't work on their own type. So to use a basic example, this was meant to prevent fire types from being burned by Flamethrower, or electric types getting paralyzed by Thunderbolt, but it had unintended effects where normal types couldn't be paralyzed by Body Slam, and ghost types couldn't be paralyzed by Lick. These have both been fixed as of Gen 2, but the system still wasn't perfect though. Tri-Attack is the only exception to the rule. It can still burn fire types, paralyze electric types, and freeze ice types. This would not be fixed until Gen 3. Twin Needle has a similar effect that can poison steel and poison types. This also wouldn't be fixed until Gen 3. Sandstorm is introduced as a weather condition in this generation, dealing damage to every type except for ground, rock, and steel, but it doesn't grant any buffs for these types until abilities are introduced later on. Spikes are also introduced as an entry hazard in Gen 2, which grants flying types an extra attribute where they can avoid all entry hazards, save for Stealth Rock, which would later be introduced in Gen 4. Moving on to Gen 3, not a lot happens aside from the aforementioned fixes regarding Tri-Attack, which were already very rare cases. Pretty much the only significant addition here is the Hail weather condition, which does damage to every type except Ice. However, it would be a very long time before Ice actually got any other benefits from Hail, making it one of the less impactful weather conditions. Of course, Gen 4's biggest change would be the physical special split, meaning that types are no longer physical or special by default. For example, Fire was always a special type in Gens 1 through 3, meaning regardless of whether you use Fire Punch or Flamethrower, it would be special. Now the change has been made so that you can do physical or special damage with any type. Probably one of the best changes that Game Freak has ever made. Gen 4 would also introduce Toxic Spikes, giving Poison type the attribute of erasing their presence when they switch in, so long as they're able to touch the ground, like Muck and Ariados. This does not apply to levitating Poison types like Weezing or Crobat. Gen 4 also granted a buff to Rock types, where their special defense is boosted by 50% in a Sandstorm. It's a rather random addition, but it is noteworthy. The abilities Snow Cloak and Ice Body are introduced. They don't cover every ice type, but it gives some Pokemon of the type slightly more utility during hailstorms. Blizzard also gets changed from 100% accuracy in a hailstorm to auto hit, so the opponent's evasion or user's accuracy no longer matter. Well, Gen 5 is another relatively silent generation when it comes to type changes, so while there's a little intermission in the lesson, let me teach you about how to build your own site using the tools over at SquareSpace. If your New Year's resolution was to better yourself as an online creator, then SquareSpace has you covered. It is so easy to head on over there, pick yourself out a template from their vast selection, whether you're an entertainer like me, someone starting a business, or anything in between, the options are all there. One of my favorite features is the ability to create and cultivate a community, and being able to easily send out emails and manage various perks. Speaking of communities, it's incredibly easy to link all of your social media platforms together under one big umbrella. Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, you name it. You can also easily display any videos from those platforms on your site with just the click of a few buttons. Be sure to check Squarespace out, and when you're done, head over to my link in the description, squarespace.com/JPR, to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you, Squarespace. Back to the video. So when it comes to Gen 5, there are no changes to the type chart or any extra attributes added to pre-existing types. Pretty much the only thing of note is that many abilities were either expanded or introduced in this generation to buff the effects of weather. For example, Drought and Drizzle are now available to Ninetales and Politoed, respectively. Sand Force and Sand Rush are also introduced as a buff to many of the Pokemon that benefit from Sandstorm, including the kingpin of the Gen 5 metagame himself, Excadrill. The question mark type, or the mystery type as some call it, was killed off in Gen 5. Oh, the humanity! This change doesn't affect any actual Pokemon, but it used to be the type of the move Curse, and in Gen 3 only, eggs were also displayed as the mystery type. After several generations of things staying relatively the same, Gen 6 would bring about a plethora of changes as Pokemon transitioned to the world of 3D. Obviously, the biggest addition of all would be the Fairy type, a direct nerf to the Dragon type, which was running rampant in Gen 5 due to the addition of many strong Pokemon like Haxorus and Hydreigon, Garchomp benefiting from the newly upgraded Sandstorm, and the expansion of the incredibly powerful move Dragon Dance. To help fill out this new type's library, a whopping 22 Pokemon and 3 moves were retconned as Fairy, with most of them being normal types like Clefairy, Togepi, and Jigglypuff. But that's not to say that many past types weren't altered as well. Since the very beginning, grass types have been immune to the effects of Leech Seed, but this was expanded in Gen 6 as they are no longer affected by powder or spore-related moves as well. This would be the generation in which Electric finally joins Fire, Ice, and Poison as a type immune to its own status, meaning that they cannot be paralyzed under any circumstances, a far overdue change if you ask me. Ghost types can now be withdrawn from battle even if they've been hit with Mean Look or are facing a Pokemon that has Arena Trap or Shadow Tag. They can also flee from a battle against any wild Pokemon even if their speed is lower than the opponent, which honestly, I did not know about. Steel types were defensively nerfed in Gen 6, losing their resistance to both Dark and Ghost, which frankly didn't make any sense at all. I don't get why it was like that in the first place. To compensate though, Steel now does super effective damage against the newly introduced Fairy type, so basically Steel moved from being a mostly defensive type to a more overall balanced one. Clearly it worked out, because if you watched my best types in every region videos last year, you know that Steel is still easily the best type in the game. Weather is nerfed across the board in this generation after they realized that they may have gone a teensy bit too far in Gen 5. Weather activating abilities now only last 5 turns instead of being permanent. Although they aren't weather conditions, very similar effects known as terrains were introduced, coming in Grass, Electric, and Fairy variants, with Psychic Terrain later being introduced in Gen 7. This means now that 9 of the 18 types have access to some sort of beneficial weather or terrain. But speaking of weather, one type is still fiercely lagging behind the others in terms of viability, that being Ice. Fortunately, Gen 7 would address this, to some degree, introducing the abilities Slush Rush and the move Aurora Veil. And Ice types are now immune to Sheer Cold, which really doesn't mean anything, but it's the thought that counts. In addition, Snow Warning is also available on many Pokemon that aren't just Abomasnow now. With all of that being said, is Ice a good type now? No, but at least they tried. The Bug type also notably gained access to several powerful moves in this generation, in addition to Leech Life gaining what may very well be the biggest buff and base power in Pokemon history. Once again, did that make Bugs any better? Not really. Dark types received their first major change in Gen 7. Now they ignore the effects of the opponent's Prankster ability, making them an excellent check for some annoying utility Pokemon in the VGC format. And finally, we've arrived at Generation 8. Like Gen 5, no types were directly changed or given any extra attributes. However, because of the absurd power spike for terrains in Gen 7 due to the introduction of the Tapus and their respective terrain surge abilities, the boosts of the terrains have been nerfed from 50% down to 30% in this generation. Presumably, Dynamax being able to grant terrain to nearly any Pokemon through max moves is another reason for their nerf. So hey, next time you get hit by an absurdly strong Expanding Force or Rising Voltage or Grassy Glide, just remember, it could be a lot worse. Now wait, don't minimize this video. The bell does not dismiss you, I do. There is still a pop quiz left to do. There is one type that wasn't mentioned throughout this entire video, a type that for the most part has remained exactly the same since Gen 1. Do you know what it is? Okay, I know, you're gonna be late for Lumio's Trainer Zach's class if you don't hurry. So the answer is the fighting type. I mean, it makes sense, fighting doesn't have any statuses, weather, or terrain associated with it. The only real changes it's gone through is being super effective against Steel and Dark, and not very effective against Fairy. But I wouldn't really consider those changes, just new types having an effect on fighting. Well, congrats, you passed the class by making it this far. Your reward is getting to leave a like on this video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. You never know when you'll need to go back to school. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.